Yeah, I don't know, man. You ever just feel like life is just catapulting towards some greater purpose?
Pampered fat cats with bloated ego. We are the only DJ crazy enough to tattoo Jackie Brown on his ass.
This is Michael Mann, and I ride with
Extended Clip.
Welcome to Extended Clip. It is episode 467, and I'm one of your hosts, Eddie Averill.
I'm Malcolm Baum.
I'm JT White.
And today we are wrapping up our miniseries on the history films made for television by Roberto Rossellini with really more of a miniseries than a film. His 3-part, 4-hour project, The Age of Medici, which came out in 1972, and is his overview of Florence during the time of the Renaissance and the age that Cosimo Medici was the kind of de facto ruler of Florence during such a great, prosperous time of artistic and scientific achievement. Malcolm, you, as we just mentioned off mic, did not treat this. Actually, I'm going to take that back a little. I was going to say that you didn't take the traditional method of watching this over the course of multiple days, but in today's world of binge watching on your favorite streaming services, I think Malcolm really did do the contemporary standard operating procedure here, where you fire up the Criterion channel and you just let that shit ride for 4 hours. So how was your binge of The Age of Medici?
Yeah, I treated this just how you would treat, Stranger Things. I just kind of put it on, was looking at my phone for most of the time. No.
The Age of Medici is the pit of 2026.
No, this is a movie podcast, and I know this is a mini series, but sometimes, if you watch it all at once, you could turn a mini series into a movie, and that's kind of what I've done here through, my intelligent design, kind of thinking in new ways here, kind of like Batista would, one of our main characters here. No, I really, I enjoyed this one, much like I have enjoyed all the rest of the films in this series. And, this one was interesting because, we have someone here that's not exactly like, a philosopher or inventor like Socrates, or, a king, like with the Taking of Power movie. But we have someone who kind of exists in that kind of gray area, and just an influential merchant, and who has so much money and kind of shapes society as he sees fit. And for the artists and for kind of a lot of the intelligent people under his rule in Florence, it seems like he made some good moves. Maybe someone. There's a lot of people trying to do this nowadays, right? Someone like, I couldn't help but think of George Soros, but instead of that, we get like the fight song. We get the fight song, we get like all the songs that they play, like the DNC hype videos that they make. Instead of like a guy being like, oh, you have to learn everything to do anything. You have to incorporate all aspects of art and science and religion, and kind of use that knowledge to, in any tasks that you need to do. But, I don't want to get too into the weeds already, but I really appreciated this one. And it kind of hit a little different than the other ones. But while kind of while also, having a lot of similarities. But I guess its perspective was a little bit different, and that made it interesting for me.
Yeah. I'm spinning the chair around and sitting in the classroom and being like, Cosimo Medici, he was kind of like the original influencer, the way he was influencing important people, merchants, and artists. And, I kind of bouncing off what you were saying, Malcolm, like, I think it was like different in the sense where like not like just because this is the final like history Rossellini we're covering, but it feels like it's kind of tying a bunch of aspects of like the previous history films together, like with like the taking of power of Louis the 14th. Like this kind of has that like hopping around between like a bunch of different characters and really giving you like an idea of like the full scope of like how governments are running and things like that, as opposed to like something like Blaise Pascal has like a little bit more of like a narrow scope. And I feel like with like taking this sort of like, I don't know, larger structural sort of view, you get this idea of how like business interests and art and like politics like all intersect. And I feel like he Rossellini like previously was tackling all of those things kind of like individually. I mean, obviously, save for some cases, like Pascal is like a very intellectual thinker across many planes. But here, I feel like it's kind of tying all of that like kind of together. Again, it's just been so cool to learn because of Rossellini. And I think that like in the like Wikipedia section for Medici, I think it's like some of the funniest stuff of Rossellini. Like his goal with like the whole like all of these history films, I think is like kind of the same thing. But like the quote in particular there like struck me about him saying that like having a problem with the way the educational system is nowadays, where it's just like it's all wrong. It's kind of like the classic like, man, school is just like getting you to be a slave. It's just giving you the mindset of being a little worker drone. And Rossellini is like, no, you should be living and encountering all sorts of things like art and philosophy, and your education should be much broader in scope. And I think it's like very, I don't know, a consistency throughout the whole project has been, it's just so fun to see like history represented in this way, and you kind of can see how I don't know, the approaches to appreciating art and philosophy and understanding the world at large was like significantly different.
Absolutely. And I think that like with what you were talking about with his aims, JT, I think a lot of it has to do with the time period too, because so many people were looking for like a new way forward at this point, you know? Rossellini was very like encouraging of the more like politically radical filmmakers that came out of the French New Wave and stuff like that. And obviously starting with his Italian neorealist films, or really particularly with those his films had always documented the impact of, you know, fascism upon people. And something like, you know, Germany Year Zero is right there in the title. And I feel like, you know, this is something that I thought would have been a reach for the first 3 episodes, but for the Age of Medici, this really feels like him saying, this is what we need to do to move forward. Like, we need a new Renaissance, you know? Like, he wasn't making Power of Louis the 14th like, we need a French prime minister to take power like Louis the 14th did, you know? Or we need a new Blaise Pascal to invent new vacuums. But I think the Age of Medici, he's really tapping into something about, or particularly in the 3rd episode, which is subtitled The Humanism of Leon Battista Alberti. And the humanism of everything encapsulating everything, basically, is like a nirvana of humanity, where every single one of the major art forms, as well as like the hard sciences and, banking and government, they all encapsulate each other. And there are dozens of characters throughout the 4-hour runtime that say such things. This is like maybe even the most blunt and didactic of any of these Rossellini history films that we've watched. And I think language has to do with it too, because here's where we get into a real sidebar of all sidebars. But first 3 of these movies, my files had, both English and French Italian and French dub options. And as we've talked about before on the podcast, with Italian movies, they're all going to be shot without sync sound up until, I want to say, the late 80s, early 90s. And so a lot of them do have like a weird dissonant dubbing effect to them. And it was in this one that I realized, like, the Italian dubbing was just not even fucking close to what the dudes were saying.
Yeah.
And so I switched on the English dub, and I realized it's like a perfect match for like 70% of the characters. And they must have been just speaking English on set for like a lot of this. And then once in a while, if you're watching the English dub, it won't sync up whatsoever, where it's clear this actor was speaking Italian or French or whatever. And I think that language is like a really important thing to tap into with these movies, because we talked about it with Socrates too, because like that was a French production for TV for the most part, but it's like kind of important to do it in ancient Greek if you're like a Socratic scholar or whatever, like so many people are talking about with the new Christopher Nolan Homer movie. And so I found it to be really interesting and even ironic that like in this, I think it's in part 3, there's like a discourse about the quote unquote vulgar languages that are arising throughout Europe versus the classical languages of ancient Latin and Greek, and how they should be discussing art and religion in which tongue. And like they're saying all of this dubbed in English for me, and so the irony and like dissonance triples down. But I really like that. I don't know why. I just that is one of many distancing effects that exist in these films that like kind of are what distinguish them from filmed commercial entertainment as filmed educational entertainment, Yeah,
it's the Vulgate is what they call it, or is that how you say it? Like
Well, that's the thing also.
Sure.
The huge thing about watching the English dub is that I also had the subtitles on still, which are a translation of what was said in the Italian dub, because there are some slight differences throughout it. So that's like even quadrupling down on the dissonance and the irony of language in this. But in the subtitles they called it the Vulgate, and then in the English dub they called it the vulgar tongue.
So those are, I guess, interchangeable. And I only watched the Italian version with the English subtitles, but I had a feeling that maybe some of the translation wasn't exactly 100% accurate when, kind of at the beginning of episode 2, we have Batista and his friend going to the barbershop looking for some gossip. And then that's what the subtitles say. And, it just doesn't, maybe that is the right term. Maybe I'm just so caught up on the American connotation of the word gossip. And I'm like, that doesn't feel like a word that they... But I guess, I don't know. I don't know what the ancient term for gossip is, but I don't know.
Well, exactly. But that's the thing about it is like none of this is in the ancient tongue. Once in a while, they do switch into Latin, which I probably wouldn't have noticed if I was watching the Italian dub, to be honest. Mm-hmm. But watching the English dub, they once in a while will veer into Latin, which is subtitled, which really enunciates like whatever phrase they're saying at that given time. So I don't think it's off base to use the word gossip there. Like they're using simplified, Italian/English, and that is an electric scene, Malcolm, the future of barbershops being established in Renaissance Florence, where that's where you go to get the hot goss, is where you're getting your shit lined up and getting a shave.
Which, not to, the one critique I'll levy on this movie, those men did not, everyone had, bare faces. You know, no one was really getting like shaved. It was kind of like a shave simulation. You know, we didn't really see the lineup or anything like that, which, you know, this movie really gets into everything, right? Like that's like something that's said in multiple parts, like, you know, to know one thing, to be an artist, you must also be a banker and a scientist and a dog breeder and you know, the poet and you know, a blacksmith. You know, well, you know, maybe not all of those, but you know, kind of like you need to understand all these aspects to understand, you know, what makes one thing great, like architecture, right? Like that's kind of a confluence of a bunch of different things there. And I'm like, let's get more into the weeds. I want to see how are they, you know, the haircuts we're getting down, you know, and the hairstyles and how they proliferated throughout the years. You know, and I'm kind of joking about that, but like that's something that this movie would do because it's so much about kind of like, you know, the exchange of ideas and kind of how these discussions happened and, you know, how the opposition kind of, you know, opposition to those ideas would kind of, you know, kind of shape thought going forward. And I feel like it does a really good job with that, you know, in, you know, with something more specific like architecture. But, so yeah, that's, I guess I wanted more haircut info, but you know, that's that is just an example of why this movie's so good. Cause I feel like that's something that could happen within the realm of the movie.
Well, the cross-pollination stuff is like, yeah, it's the key to the movie, and hence the term Renaissance man, obviously, you know. But like, once Battista Alberti becomes like the main character kind of the second half of this, you know, he considers himself just a writer who's like writing about architecture, kind of. Someone, you know, commissions him. He gets like an architecture commission. And he's like, I'm just a writer, you know? And they're like, look, those are the same thing, writing and architecture, you know? And it's like, damn, it's kind of a mind-blowing moment right there. But it really, all of these discussions about like the cross-pollination of studies across different fields, the intersectional research or whatever you would call it, like, is really fascinating to me as like for Rossellini as someone who's just diving neck deep into history here. Like he's diving into history and he's diving into television production and like stretching the limits of what you're able to do in this kind of cousin medium to the cinema that he's already mastered. And I find that to be like incredibly cool that he's just like, I'm going to look back to the Renaissance. They had it going on. You could have religion, art, commerce, politics, all intertwined, and it was good. Like that doesn't sound like it should be good, but it really was good. And yeah, I don't know. All of those intertwining like fields of study and everything also made me think back to, I remember a while back, our buddy, friend of the show, Neil Bahadur, was talking about this on Twitter, like what filmmakers were studying before they got into filmmaking, like their second discipline of expertise, kind of, where, you know, Eisenstein studied architecture and engineering, Nicholas Ray, architecture, John Ford, English literature, Edward Yang, engineering, George Lucas, anthropology, Goddard, anthropology, Michael Mann, poli-sci, De Palma, physics, you know, like just knowing that even if it's an undergrad major, that people are putting that much time into these fields outside of their medium. And, you know, a lot of people would say that English literature is that far from cinema, you know, that it may as well be civil engineering or something like that. And I just find that really fascinating and also inspiring for myself to just like get out of cinema a little bit and like explore the world, because it'll make cinema make more sense.
Yeah, no, that like, with what you were saying earlier, Eddie, about like this feels like the most like kind of prescriptive that any of these like Rossellini films have felt. Like the Blaise Pascal one is just like, it's like, look at how cool this guy is, and that he is able to like do interdisciplinary like feats of genius. But here it kind of like really provides like the framework, or just sort of like expands out upon like a society where like integrating the connection of these ideas was like paramount, and the just intellectual boom that happened, and just all the knowledge that was being discovered. And it is something where again, the structure the story takes, and I think the fact that this one is so long, because of it, you get like all this time to like get in more nooks and crannies and just like learn so much more.
Yeah, there's an
Absolutely.
there's an emphasis, like thinking about the structure, right? You kind of have like the first half is kind of Medici kind of planting the seeds, and we see like how he does it in a literal sense, in where he like pays off his friend's debts when he comes back out of exile, or or how he kind of negotiates with the church to not get killed for his, which I was like, why did they want to kill him? I guess just because he was speaking up against the war crimes, but I guess that was enough back then, just to, I'm like, and then in the second half, we kind of see Medici's dreams realized, and he's kind of out of the picture. And like the ending is kind of like Batista being like, we did it. We built a society where geniuses are, venerated. And so it's really interesting because it's, we're talking a lot about, kind of like the Enlightenment and kind of how it was the result of it. But there's also a good emphasis on kind of Medici's kind of dealings and kind of how he kind of walks the tightrope of having political power without being a politician, literally. And, kind of shows how the merchant class, started wielding their power in these societies, and kind of, took some power away from like these heavily like religious societies, and kind of, it's even a quote in the movie, one cannot rule a society through religion alone. And that's what the structure kind of affords the movie. It's like, not only do we see these ideas intact and why they might be so powerful, but kind of, Rossellini shows us how the bread was buttered, in a sense.
Well, also what you were saying, Malcolm, about how you can't govern with religion alone, and this is this transitional period. It's on display from the very beginning. Like the opening shot of this is of a dead, shrouded body, and that is Medici Senior, Cosimo's father. And while they're at like his wake, you get one of mine and I guess Rossellini's both favorite biblical phrases, the needle through the camel's eye, about being able to pass through to heaven as a rich man, which is a quote that he also drops in The Flowers of St. Francis. Or no, you know what? I take that back. That quote was in Pasolini's religious film that we watched recently. Yes, that's what it was in. But regardless, so it's like that piety is on display at the same exact time that like Rossellini just pans and zooms over to explore more of the stage, and we hear people talking business already, and someone even remarks the body's still warm and we're already talking business. In that scene alone is that transition in micro, but then over the next 4 hours, we see it unveil as a civilization flourishes. And also, to speak about the explorative camera as well in this one, I think this is the peak of that style that we were talking about, where the zooms are really just like finding the information in the moment, where Rossellini's operating this remote zoom thing, and I really think that like this is the most remarkable version of that, whereas Blaise Pascal had some more like tracking shots in it, and Socrates was a step in this direction, and Louis XIV also a little more rigid, with some slow zooms. This one, the slow zooms in and out are like insane and like playful at times and disorienting and purposefully reorienting, and they are definitely proto Hong Sang-soo in the way that they use the pan and the zoom as substitutes for cuts rather than like continuations of shots. Like it'll just be like a long pan or a long zoom in or out that's like might as well just be a very long cut, but you're still just immersed in the world of the mise-en-scène. And I just find that to be so fascinating, where once in a while I will not even like, I'll have to rewind because I'm like, wait, what were they saying? I am like so lost in the sauce with just like the camera like exploring the sets and just finding the beauty and oddness and knowledge within the mise-en-scène of every given scene. And also, like Hong Sang-soo, this is the one where it's like almost no cuts at all during scenes. Like barely any cuts to close-ups on people or inserts or anything like that, or reverses. It's like mainly just that zoom remote exploring the space in an insanely fascinating way.
Yeah, I love that quality, and I also was thinking of like Hong, like the entire time. I mean, obviously, like achieving like different effects with it, but still that same sort of like emphasizing or reframing or refocusing like a moment. And like the way like Rossellini's camera in this like kind of moves around, like it feels like akin to like, I don't know, especially because they're covering such like big spaces at points where they're like huge like paintings and things on the wall. It felt like similar to like the experience of like going into a museum like for the first time and kind of like looking around and like letting your eye take you to where like whatever like is the most interesting. And I think it like pairs well with like just like the kind of like just straightforward like didactic like conversations that are occurring, because it's just like, okay, your eye can wander and you can sort of like focus on what you want in the frame and sort of figure things out while you're just sort of letting the knowledge like wash over you and soak in. And like, yeah, I don't know. Like every time, like I've been really excited about these movies, and I've been like talking to friends about them since we've been watching them. And it's just something that's so funny because it's just like describing the style of like these sort of slow, like meditative, like history films. And like, it sounds like it's like the most like boring fucking thing in the world. And I'm certainly a not for everyone kind of movie,
especially with like the performance style too. Like beyond wooden for a lot of these performances, but that's like part of the pleasure of it, is like it's as if you're at a school play where it's an educational school assembly style play where they're kind of like playing to you, the audience member, a little like, make sure you write this down, you know? And I adore that. That's incredibly enriching.
And, you know, I think what's also very satisfying is that, you know, the visuals kind of match the rhythm of the dialogue, where, you know, in a traditional movie, right, there's a lot of to be made about like connections between like individuals, and you get like the reverse shot. And with this one here, it's like, it's kind of like what you guys are saying. It's like you're hearing someone like speak, like hearing someone like lecture to you, or even when people do have conversations, they go on these very long diatribes. There's not a lot of like, it's not very back and forth dependent. It's more like, all right, it's my turn to speak. I'm going to speak for 2 minutes. Then, all right, I'll give you a 1 minute response to that, you know? And I think what Rossellini does with the camera is so genius, because we could kind of zoom in and out of these diatribes, right? And, you know, we not only give emphasis to the speaker, which, you know, they're speaking for so long that you can only give them so much emphasis, but then we kind of zoom out and see how the people react to what's being said. And I think maybe one of the more stylistic sequences that kind of displays this is when we see in episode 2, when we go to the cathedral and we hear a priest, you know, kind of give a sermon. And that's kind of, that's Rossellini kind of drops the simplification with the visuals and kind of really kind of goes for it there, where we kind of get the tilts of showing the grandiosity of the church and an emphasis on kind of all these crowd reactions and all these different people kind of taking in what's being said and feeling the grandness of the the preacher on top of his podium or he's pretty elevated. I don't know what you'd call that, but
yeah, it's like a bird's nest. It's like the on a boat, what's that called? The
a bird's nest on a boat. Oh, is that like some nautical terms right there?
Yeah, what's that thing called where you're up top of the boat?
Like the top.
Yeah,
like
isn't it called the bird's nest?
I think it is a bird's nest.
Okay, that's cool.
Crow's nest is what crow's
okay.
nest.
But that seems so brilliant because with a movie about kind of like information and ideas, right? Like we really get a sense of how ideas were received and kind of this is a classic historical staple. But yeah, it's like these churches were so grand and and it made the messages more powerful just being in these beautiful structures.
Also, I mean, that scene where the guy's giving the sermon and the crow's nest type thing, and it's like everyone's like in a mosh pit below. It is a crazy like layout for an audience. But that is one where, Malcolm, you said he kind of breaks like the camera style from the rest of it. And I honestly, it's one of those things where like I was so immersed in the speech and like the power of it and just like taking in everything in the mise en scène that it felt like the camera was suspended in midair as if it was like Murnau or something like that, and just like soaring through the air. I'm pretty sure it was just an elevated camera that was zooming back and forth, maybe a little bit of tracking or sliding too, but like I don't think it was all that elaborate of camera movement. I think it was more of like the whirlwind of it all.
Sure.
Just perfectly adding up and immersing the viewer. That is a fantastic part in part two. Part one, though, I want to talk about a couple things that happen in part one, which is subtitled The Exile of Cosimo. And as we said, it opens on the dead body. And one thing that relates to what JT was talking about of like the museum experience of the zooming roving camera, that's also reflected in the script and like the order of incident and stuff like that and how things get doled out, because it's like right after that, the wake or whatever, as we're on our way to the Duomo to see some of the new frescoes there, that we just like get some guys on horseback come by and be like, yo, you hear about this Joan of Arc lady? Like that shit's going crazy. Does not have to do with us though, thank God. Like we're chilling over here, but that stuff's crazy. And it's like being at a museum and like seeing the little thing. It's like, oh, there's a new Joan of Arc display on the 3rd floor. I'm going to go later. I'm going to stick with this Florence stuff here, but once they do get into that stuff, I mean, the Duomo, that is the Florence Cathedral of Santa Maria with its iconic domed roof, and like the paintings in there of, who was it? I had Masaccio, in the Brenacci Chapel. The works of Masaccio there are like being put into question by a religious lady who's talking about the representation of Christ as being like very human-like and why that's offensive or whatever. And this is clearly a his art history 101 moment about the representation of holy figures in art and how the Renaissance kind of changed people's perspective on that. Perspective is a funny word because then we also learn about the invention of artistic perspective. And I really love just like how this operates as like an art history 101 sidebar kind of thing. Like here and there, they'll just be like, oh yeah, because of the thesis of this movie that everything is connected. If we want to show how life was lived in Renaissance Florence, we're gonna have to do art history 101 as well as European history 101, because they are the same thing at this point in time.
Yeah, that scene's really great because it is like, I think there's like even because I think that's in part 2, and there's even a scene in part 1 where I can't remember this character's name, but he's kind of seeing some of the Florentine art for the first time. He's like, dang, I've never seen the human figure, so there's some salacious paintings here, of religious figures, and like it shows a great example of kind of the transition of thought, exemplified through art. And then once we get to the second scene, it's like not only the depiction, but it's like, yeah, he's like using everything. Like he's using all the gifts God gave us, like geometry, to really emphasize the figure here. And I think that's what the movie does well, is that when you're kind of depicting these figures of genius, you kind of need the people who are like, kind of wary of change. And even if it kind of feels like an art history 101 moment, I feel like for what the film's trying to accomplish, you need to see the pushback. And, and that's what the exchange of ideas is. If there's no one pushing back, then, Batista wouldn't have to explain why the painting's actually good. I would love to do that to someone at a museum, just lecture them for 3 minutes. Actually, it's actually good because of this. You're wrong. But it's very paramount that he did.
The thing in episode 1, actually, that I wanted to mention that has to do with the cathedral. No, because Malcolm, you're totally right. I had it jumbled in my notes here because they're side by side. The introduction to that structure of the Duomo is the first time we see something like this in the movie, which we see quite a bit, like a big matte painting backdrop of like a historic piece of architecture, and we saw that in Taking of Power with the Louvre. Also, the Louvre under construction was a matte backdrop in that one, but in this one they're made like the false fronts of TV Western sets almost, where people like walk in and out of them, and it's very clear that they're like, no more than a couple feet deep. But I really like that because it calls into question like a representation of a representation, basically, because we're watching it on TV, and then within the TV they're doing this reproduction of it because of what it looks like now, not being historically accurate for the time. And then of course within this structure, within this cathedral, we have art that at the time was called into question due to the nature of representation, and so it all comes full circle once again there with Rossellini showing you that everything is everything, and art history is also TV production methodology.
To speak on the TV aspect of it, it is seeing the visual style kind of evolve over these 4 movies has been such a treat, I would say, because sometimes I'd say, maybe the differences are kind of subtle, but it's like, Rossellini, he's ultimately making TV here. You kind of have to get a house style cooking. You can't, reinvent the wheel every time visually, and there's a lot of directors, of course, that's not their goal either, but there's a difference between the visual language of this and, his films prior, and kind of seeing him kind of, watching these in chronological order. I believe did we watch these in chronological order?
Yeah. Well, we didn't watch all of them in chronological order, but the series is in chronological order.
Okay.
Yeah. We just like skipped over a couple. That's all.
Oh, there's more? Wow.
Oh, there's more.
Yeah.
There's Cartesius. There's the one about Rene Descartes, which is like, that's, if you liked Descartes' cameo in Blaise Pascal, wait till you get to Cartesius, which I believe also features character actor legend who pops up in episode 2, Fred Ward. who, you know, we've talked about before on our Miami Blues episode, one of the great character actors of like the 80s, 90s, 2000s. His earliest work was dubbing English tracks for Italian movies in the studios in the early 70s in Italy. And his first like on-screen role was for fucking Roberto Rossellini playing Nicola di Conti in Part 2, the explorer of the Far East who is referred to as half Mohammed by some people.
Oh, that's a great character too. Yeah, that's a
Yeah, that guy, he rules. And also, like, I have a feeling he dubbed his own voice, because I'll put in an audio clip. Like, that is when I was like, oh, I'm so glad I'm watching the English dub, because Fred Ward is very clearly speaking English. It's like a perfect match on his mouth. But it also, like, I think it is him. I think it's him doing the dub. And he's hamming it up so hard. Like, he is acting so much more than everybody else in that scene. There's even a scene where, like, he's goofing off, like, making fun of, I forgot what he's making fun of, but like maybe the inefficiencies of like another town that he stopped in. And like, he just has the whole room busting up. It's like 30 seconds of Rossellini like panning around, showing everyone laughing at Fred Ward's, just affable swag as he walks in from his journeys from the Far East.
Well, what scene is it? Because there's two Fred Ward scenes that really stick out to me and kind of are...
They're both like at the end of part 2.
Well, there's the one where he's kind of first introduced, where he's like, yeah, like I've kind of been a merchant all over, and like I've been to countries and I've pretended to be Muslim even though I'm a Christian, and like, but it's I'm never gonna say no to a buck, I'll fake my religion. And was it that scene, or is it the ending scene where he's kind of like, wow, the Medicis are really doing it. They're kind of doing it right over here, where he's kind of like, you guys are doing your thing and making money too. Like, this is kind of like a new, like, he's kind of like, you've made all these things that were kind of seen as dishonorable, maybe something like usury or something like that. And like, now you've kind of put like you guys are using the funds and you're putting it back into the community. He doesn't quite say all that, but he's just like, wow, you found like an ethical way to be a merchant or something like that. And that's kind of how episode 2 ends. And I just love kind of the outside perspective we're given there, because we're so immersed in this Florentine society that the outsider, I don't know, I feel like he gives some good perspective there.
Yeah, it is in that scene that like there's a good pan of people laughing at him, like his outsider perspective of like, damn, yeah, you guys are, you're still doing your moneylender thing. You're still doing the Shylock business. I mean, look, we're in Florence, not Venice, but they were talking about some ducats, some lending of ducats at one point. So, Shylock, his ears perked up from across the country. But regardless, I found that scene to have like a odd bit of cynicism to it, even though it didn't. I think he was just like, he was like so jovial in the moment, because I had to look into it after, and it's like, yeah, that character just like lived out the rest of his life in Florence as like a very successful merchant. Like he was totally chilling in the Age of Medici, and so that almost feels more like Rossellini giving commentary on the era. Like, yeah, like they did still do usury. They still were kind of loan sharks. Like they were, that is kind of hit hard in the first episode too, where there's like a long discourse of just like, so usury is illegal, right? Yeah, but there's signs that say you could borrow money from a guy who weaves silk.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And they're just like kind of go. It's like the weird, like this is in part 1, like the weird quasi legality of usury in Florence at the time. And I like that as like the kind of dark underpinning where it's like, look, it wasn't all perfect. It just so happens that the most powerful banker in the land really wanted to fund artistic and scientific advancement, you know, and hey, I'll take that. You know,
Yeah.
we could still exist under, like, obviously nobody loves capitalism, but like, if you got one of the big guys calling the shots, just like, yeah, sure, I'll throw all my money into the arts and stuff like that. Like, that's pretty sick.
Yeah.
That's
Well, yeah.
I forgot what it is. Go ahead,
I was
Malcolm.
gonna say, because I think those scenes with, you know, kind of I think they call him the Arabic merchant, right? And kind of you know, maybe the beginning or stuff in part one where it is like no, there's examples of this in each part, so to speak, where there's something here that aren't in Rossellini's other history films that I can remember, but kind of like, you know, the punishments and kind of the violence that was used to kind of enact power. And you bringing up the silk, I mean, you know, the Silk Weavers Union gets a nice chunk in part one, and that's kind of one of the more fun parts there, where, you know, we see the Silk Weavers Union meet up, and of course all these guys got the best coats. They got the best coats in Florentine. They all got different colors, you know, they're all very fashionable, which I thought was a fun touch, and, you know, probably realistic, right? You got the silk, you got you know, you got the best clothes, right? And they find an example of kind of like their silk weaving style, I believe, found in the wild, and I can't exactly remember how, but then they locate the person who kind of sold out that style that's supposed to be a secret within their own union. And what do? They burn his house down. They take care of business. And, you know, also the dealings of Medici's critics, right? The people who put him into exile at the you know, with episode 1, part 1 here. And we kind of see them meet a violent end too, and some of the other parts. So it is, I think, more so than something like Socrates or Blaise Pascal, right? Like, Rossellini's giving you the full picture, and obviously I think he's a fan of what the Medici did, and kind of maybe even, you know, just patronage for the arts, the ideas that Medici brings in general. But he's also, you know, he's realistic, where, you know, he's doing the usury, he's, you know, there's still the violence of this age. You know, it's the Renaissance era. It's this is like the 1400s, right? So it's like there's still going to be some brutality to what's going on.
Yeah, it just like it's the historical aspect of it. Like, again, obviously, it really emerges like what Rossellini admires about the Renaissance, and like this like landmark time for human invention and intellectual discovery. But like, it would not be like true to history if he just ignored some of the ugly parts. It's like, yeah, no, this guy's like giving away our garment secrets. We're gonna fuck him up. And yeah, all of the like backroom like wheeling and dealing. Like, you cannot, like, I don't know. It's what led to. It's what greased the wheels and led to some of these things happening. You can't just not talk about it.
Also, during those, I guess you could call them action scenes, the violent scenes, the score is so sick.
Yeah.
Like, it really reminds you that you're watching a 70s Italian production. It's like hardcore, like Polizia Tecci action scenes, like the kind of thing that would be in Live Like a Cop, Die Like a Man, you know?
What like instruments are being used in those scenes? I can't even pinpoint.
It's like a weird organ kind of thing. Like, you know, it's early synth organ type stuff with some live instrumentation as well, like rhythm section stuff. But yeah, no, the score in this one is definitely quite different than the rest of the history films. And I like that each time out, it seems like Rossellini has taken a different strategy, or at least Rossellini's composer has taken a different strategy on each of these.
Yeah, the scores are very unique and kind of maybe like a little bit peculiar, you would say, you know, with kind of some of the dissonance.
The Socrates one is my favorite.
Yeah,
the ambient one for Socrates is so fucking sick. So part one ends with Cosimo Medici like negotiating exile rather than getting killed by the state, and like everyone's just like, yeah, dude, he should just get killed right now. He's just like, look, man, I'm just let me just be in exile, you know. And so he like even goes on a 3-day hunger strike and then drops off a sack of gold to get like a big final meal with the nobility before he gets sent out. And you know, he kind of like goes out on his own terms. I like that about him, because hey, this guy had a lot of money. He could kind of buy his way into whatever he wanted to do. And speaking of buying whatever he wanted to do, when we say that he funded a ton of art, we are not fucking around.
Oh, yeah.
In modern day currency, he would have spent $500 million on artistic projects that he funded.
Wow.
Like, that's his own money. Like, $500 million of his own money. That's crazy. That's because that's like, it's not like he's selling it. It's not like he's commissioning a movie that he's making points on the back end on. It's like fucking Donatello's David, just like for everyone to look at, you know. Like,
well, you know, it shows if only, you know, there were more good capitalists like Mr. Medici, right? Because there's even like a speech, right?
Well,
it's like he's good because a greedy man doesn't just hold on to his money. He like shapes society as he sees fits and hopefully improves it. And, you know, for some people, right, that's become a, you know, conspiratorial narrative, you know, because maybe that's like the people who do that don't have the best in mind, right? Like the way the people, this is like the most optimistic view of like a businessman kind of shaping society as he sees fit.
totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's like, yeah, fucking Elon Musk is trying to do that right now, too,
Yeah.
you know? Like,
The mindset is just not there. Like
Yeah.
they have not been like perverted by like hundreds of years of like capitalism. Like I don't think like Medici is like, oh wow, like, well, I'm gonna commission like Donatello to make this statue, and then everyone, like, you could pay me $5 to see it. It's like just simply like that's not like on the table. And I mean, you even see that like in the time with like, I don't know, I think in the first episode I definitely get lost a little bit
Sure.
in the weeds at points, but like with the way they talk about like banking regulation and like giving money, like things were definitely like, again, because these were so heavily like religious societies, like things were like organized in a way where like it's not a given, and like most of the time it's not just to get a quick buck off of things. And so I think it's interesting where definitely you do see aspects of that portrayed like realistically and I think like negatively, but there are also just like it exists like so earlier. It's like pre-hustle mindset.
Yeah.
They're grinding, but just for like the love of art and philosophy and culture, not to like get their paper up.
It's because they know they're making human achievement that's like on par with the ancient Greeks, you know, like I don't know, that's what got me fucking jazzed up about this. Like we need a new renaissance I think we need a new renaissance for cinema, like a micro renaissance. Like if people, cause in this one, it's just like, if people actually studied, you know, the ancient Greeks, like we could kind of like get on that flow a little bit, you know, like if we really dive deep into Homer and like dive deep into like the dudes that were making sculptures of Homer, like we can use the hundreds or even I guess 2 or so thousand years of time and of human advancement to like really pick up where they left off here, you know, and form a real society of artistic advancement of the humanities, you know. And like if we just like sent people to re-education camps where they had to grind John Ford and Howard Hawks and Otto Preminger tape, like, I think we would have a cinematic renaissance.
So yeah, the solution is cinema internment camps, you know.
Only for filmmakers. It's like, if you identify, and because like I'm totally cool with all this like identity politics stuff, like, but if you do identify as a filmmaker, you are going to get, you know, rounded up and put in a re-education camp.
Well, you know what you were kind of saying earlier, you know, quoting Neil there about, you know, some of these great directors having, you know, interests beyond cinema. I mean, I think that's, you know, that's definitely just to talk about in terms of like influence, right? Like there, you know, there's, you know, not just, obviously there's still good films being made, but a lot of it kind of feels like people are pulling from like the same influence well a lot of the times. And yeah, you know, I also thought, I didn't think about that quote because I don't remember it, you know, the one Neil said, but I also thought about De Palma while, you know, they were talking about the intersection of everything, you know, that you need to be a great artist, a great architecture, etc. And I always thought of how, you know, Brian De Palma was like, you know, my first interest in cinema was more on the tech side. Like I would like just learn everything about a camera, and I would like take it apart and reconstruct it back together again and stuff like that. So maybe maybe we turn, because who has all the tech knowledge? It's the cinematographers. We put them in cinematic re-education camp, and then we have Renaissance genius level style directors, you know, instead of these guys, you know, instead of guys like us, which we will have to take the fall, unfortunately, but guys who've watched like 2,500 movies, it's like we need that technical perspective to intersect with you know, the cinematic knowledge, and then, you know, we'll have 50 Brian De Palmas running around.
I mean, hey. As long as they have a camera and not the substitute, whatever it may be, then we're fine with 50 Brian De Palmas running around. So part 2 like opens on Cosimo Medici in exile, giving some financial advice to people that he meets along the way, staying very humble as we think back to the humility and meekness that was on display in Rossellini's The Flower of Saint Francis about 20 years before this film. And when he finally comes back, he stops at like the village where he has his pad outside of Florence, where his girl's waiting for him, and he's like, hold up, I gotta get a new cloak before I go into Florence. And he puts on like a new cool black cloak and kisses his girl on the cheek, and then struts into town, and everyone's just like, yo, fucking Medici's back. Like, people are following him around town. People are like, did you hear that he's like out of exile? Like, it's kind of a great fucking like traditional whole town's talking mini montage, but it's not in montage. It's in this style where you just hear it's almost more like audio montage in these giant crowd shots where the camera is like slowly finding its focus alongside the viewer doing the same. And I just like really loved that scene of like new swag post-exile Cosimo. He's paid his debt to society. He's chilling. He's about to really do some work now, you know.
No, I love the first kind of part of episode 2. I feel like a lot of is made about Medici's return, and I love that scene where, like, you know, they kind of, I'm guessing it's one of his enemies, maybe one of the people who sent him into exile. Like, he gathers up the army, and then one of the, I think it's a religious figure, right, or something, being like, you know, we don't even know if he's coming in, like, you have no proof of this, and he's just like, you know, and you guys all bear arms. You guys didn't just meet up. Like, you're all like, you have weapons. And like, he's like, well, yeah, but these guys are like my friends. And like, these, you know, they're your friends too. So maybe you should think of it more like that. And I just thought that was kind of a funny way to cover it up. It's like, no, these are just all my friends. This isn't an army.
Part 2 is when it really starts going into the art history 101 and like Renaissance art 101 kind of thing. Like whereas part 1 is more of the prelude and like how you get to that such a prolific period. And I think part 2, like when he's first meeting up with Donatello's apprentice, young Rossellino, not to be confused with Rossellini, that is to me when this film just completely kicks into overdrive and becomes like one of the most pleasurable things that we've covered in this series. Just like the kid showing off all of Donatello's stuff and like speaking for him on his behalf. Like we barely see Donatello in this. It's all just like people speaking on his behalf kind of, which I really like. And also his work speaking for itself. And the kid drops the quote to Medici where he's like, look, you know, Donatello told me anyone who cannot recognize all he holds within himself is not a man. And it's like, damn. He's got like a little kid as the most enlightened person ever here. Like that's some sick shit he's dropping right there. And right after that is when you get that electric barbershop scene, which is just awesome. And that's followed by another like just example of how they do things about town. The tax office, which I think might first be established in the first episode, but is picked back up here after the barbershop scene where people are like getting their taxes done in public, kind of. It's like a mix. It's like a quasi public private space where you wait in line with all your buddies and then they call you and you're like, they're like, all right, you're going to owe this many florins, and you either dispute it or you go along your merry way, kind of. But someone just like rolls up when they first show this office and they're like, the office of public shame and disgrace, which I thought was pretty awesome. But yeah, this is when our buddy Alberti kind of hops into the picture, Leon Battista Alberti, and kind of like takes the mantle from Cosimo Medici as the main character here, despite the fact that it still retains its like ensemble structure. But yeah, between the Donatello scene and the barbershop scene, and then eventually the Brunelleschi scene, like that stuff is just electric, firing on all cylinders. The Brunelleschi one is like, you know, he's showing off all of his stuff and he shows off like an awesome clock that he made. And this is like the most like non-performance didactic moment that made me laugh so hard in the film, where he's just like, you know, I find that in the future, people may need a device for keeping track of the time.
It's like, there's no use for it now, but
Yeah.
And in the same scene, he's like, by the way, would you like to see what perspective looks like? And I mean, the camera, like the way Rossellini shoots the perspective stuff is so sick, because it's like some of the only times we get insert shots in this whole thing. So you really do, like, at least I did, like, gasp almost at these tricks almost that he's performing, which are not tricks at all, but people are seeing them as such because we're in this one realistic mode of camera direction the whole time. So then you cut to these like fucking perspectives or these camera obscura type things that we see them do, and it really is breathtaking, just like these merchants and these investors are reacting to it as. It's really breathtaking, to be honest.
Well, yeah, the impact just feels, like you said, feels so massive just because of the certain mode Rossellini's in for a lot of the movie. You know, in the scene where, you know, we see the man making the clocks, that really, you know, speaks to my joke where, like, oh yeah, to be a proper Renaissance man, you got to be a banker, you got to be an artist, you have to be an embalmer, you have to be a, you know, like any insert any random thing there, because it is yeah, the clock was a, I don't know, just, he's like, you got to be a clocksmith or whatever those are called. Is there a special word for a clock manufacturer?
You know what? That is a great question. Person who makes clocks is called a clockmaker.
Oh, Come on.
You could call it a clocksmith.
Or a timesmith.
Oh, a horror. Okay, so a watchmaker more likely would also be called a horologist or orologist.
Okay. Interesting.
Orologist, Horo, orology is the art and science of timekeeping. Hey, art and science sounds like the Age of Medici.
Sounds like Medici mindset to me. Medici mindset. Buying the hottest Rolex watch you could find. That's Medici mindset. That's the intersection of science and art.
Yeah. Finding the hottest Rolex you can find, and then like having like a Snapple fact type like like I fucking love science type fact inscribed on the watch.
An engravement about how important it is time is to society or whatever. That would be. We'll get those. That'll be the Christmas gift I get everyone for this Christmas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The third one also opens on a young kid getting measured with calipers. Like that's the first image you see in episode 3, which took me aback. And we do not go down that route, thankfully. Or maybe not. Maybe you do want to know about that kind of stuff. But it is in episode 3 that I got that scene I mentioned earlier about perspective versus religious representation in those Masaccio paintings in the Bernacchi Chapel, which I found to be just like a really moving scene and also very funny. Like the old lady performance is great, like when the two guys own her with facts and logic, she's just like, ugh, and she just like walks away and then goes and prays in the corner and is just like in the background for the rest of the scene. And it speaks to something I just really love, the way Rossellini can background actors throughout this whole thing. There's a lot of really great work going on in the background.
No, I feel like this one more so than any of the other ones. There's more kind of like deliberate blocking, and like I feel like with his zooms and kind of his investigative camera, he really conjures up some painterly frames here, and like there's a lot of I think more deliberation with it than before, because I feel like there's like a couple scenes where like someone will be talking, but kind of like the main visual focus is like the guy kind of reacting to it, but like kind of positioned in a way to where we could see his face, kind of like having a lot of visual depth within the scene, where we kind of have like the guy speaking and like in the middle, and there's like a guy reacting in front, and then you have like like 3 or 4 other guys kind of filling out the frame with conversation. I feel like there's a couple of times where we get that kind of particular frame, and it just, whereas like the other movies, like they had those qualities where it's like this one, I don't know, there's just more, I feel like there's more play with like visual depth, even more so than the other ones.
JT, any thoughts on the third episode, Leon Battista Alberti's Humanism?
I don't know. I think like it's interesting, like the general course it takes to get to 3 there, like where you're fully immersed and the art life and like the human aspect of it. Like I think it's like, I don't know. Not to say that like I didn't enjoy the first like section, but I feel like it has the most where you can kind of get like kind of bogged down with some of the historical details.
Sure.
And trade, where I feel like the third, and I mean there's like with what we're talking about with the second section, I feel like there's a very clear kind of like marked point where like Medici kind of fades to the background, like as you would imagine so, because it's like, okay, well, he's funding all of these projects and whatnot. That's great, and like allows them to exist. But I think the way the third like takes off, and like you get to see, I don't know, it like it's what it's really all about, is the art that's being created there.
Yeah. The third one has some really great scenes, and there's some that I'm like not as crazy about. I think the second episode is like the best one for sure, but toward the end of the third one we get more into the kind of like philosophy again of the artist and the scientist in the Renaissance, and it's actually throughout the entirety of the third episode. But at one point Battista Alberti says that he says that like one cannot be a great artist if he is not a great scientist, which really like taps into what we've been talking about this whole time. And later on, my favorite quote in the whole thing is a man can find himself in his work with each one demonstrating both his limits and his capacities for invention. And, we get this lecture amidst all of this in front of all these like funhouse mirrors talking about Brunelleschi and his impact already. And it's like toward the end of this, we're coming to terms with the fact that like the Renaissance has already made a gigantic impact. Like these guys are talking about the guys from episodes 1 and 2 as if they're like the old guard legends already, And I feel like that brings like a really good sense of quasi closure to this whole thing,
Batista, by the end, his brain is like operating like he's 5,000 IQ. He's like the most intelligent man on Earth, and like I love the mirror stuff at the end, right? Because it is like now he's kind of getting into like stranger stuff. Like we see a preview of what art is to become, and kind of and like he's talking with Medici Jr., right? I think that's who that is at the end there, and it's kind of like respect to your father, like he made society venerate genius rather than like wealth, kind of like brute wealth. And like that's going to create a better society. But it is like, by the end, he kind of just has the wisdom and the sage, just as like kind of like the most enlightened man we've seen in these like Rossellini movies, which is hard, right? Like Blaise Pascal, that's an enlightened individual there. But like it is.
Are you forgetting Socrates?
Of course, Socrates. But I guess with this one, we don't really see. We leave on a happy note. Whereas, both those guys die, and, you got to die sometime, of course. But we kind of just like the way like it ends. It's like, we did it, man. Like we're all geniuses. We're not all a genius, but it's like we've shaped society for the better. And like, I don't know, just like in those final conversations that Batiste has, it just feels like he's like, I'm already operating on another level. I'm ready for like the Enlightenment Part 2.
Yeah. JT, any final thoughts on this whole project and a bullet rating?
I'm gonna go 4.5 bullets for the Age of Medici. Not my favorite of the Rossellini history films we've covered, but like all of them, I don't think there's one. Maybe I gave one 4 bullets, but they've been all sensational.
Yeah.
And I feel like with what this one is getting at with the intersection of science and art, I think like thinking like historically, like obviously it's like important during the Renaissance because like the way in which they're painting and like working with perspective and also like doing like sculpture, it's not like they don't mean it in like a cute kind of like having like studying like interdisciplinary like studying like different fields like is important to to make you a well enriched individual. It's like, no, you literally have to know like math to be an architect or like create these great sculptures. And obviously that's true of those disciplines today, like certainly like architecture. But I think like in the like it's just fun to take those messages to the contemporary because this is as we have been saying, feels like Rossellini's most like prescriptive and like most like a battle cry to be like, please go back and we need to be learning, we need to be studying. And I think it's like with how Rossellini felt like about cinema at the time, I feel like he kind of like feels like it's at like sort of a dead end. And to just be like, no, like read, learn, do other things, study science. I feel like it's incredibly important. And I'm not sure just like to relate like the interdisciplinary approach to like cinema in particular, I don't know how much other art forms and like people either analyzing or studying like literature or painting find this to be true, but I think cinephilia is so like insular and like so many cinephiles are just like in the weeds and see it as like a pissing contest of like, oh, well, I have to watch like a million movies and whatever. And I mean, maybe if you're like a film critic, like certainly that like is one of the best ways to learn about your craft. But also you need to live and do other things. And I think whether your study is like purely academic or whether your study is going to the barber shop with the boys and chatting over a shave, I think like all of these things are important to leading like a well-rounded life.
Yeah.
And just like capping out like the Rossellini like history films, I think it's just so like breathtaking and cool to see art that like champions art and knowledge in such a way that is like unconventional and not like corny about it. Like when you think of like educational movies, especially educational with those aims, you think of things that are like kind of like hammy and like I don't know. You think of something much different than this. And I just I don't know. This is such a fun, weird like little output that Rossellini has that I don't know has not only just like made me curious about like the full depth of Rossellini's filmography, because there's so much to explore, and like just learning about these movies, like they're so different from like other films of his that I've seen, but like I want to explore the world of art and culture.
Yeah.
I want to read my Socrates.
Yeah.
I want to grind like Medici and
Yes.
give money to other artists.
Ooh, I like that.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, JT,
they're-
I have a proposal. I'll write a book if you give me just like, you got like $20. I could really use it.
Got to start somewhere. With
Yeah.
Medici mindset.
JT, I really agree with you. I just find this experience to be so enriching, like more than cinema usually is. Like it's not like the best movies I've ever seen, or they're not the best movies I've ever seen. They're up there though. They're fucking awesome. But they are like the most like outside of cinephilia canon classics to me. Like other than like movies that exist in like pop culture spheres, I guess that kind of takes you out of cinephilia as well. But I don't know, man. As much as I love those movies, like let's say Die Hard is a movie that's like a canon classic for me that doesn't just exist for cinephiles. It like exists in the popular consensus just like a football game does, I might take Socrates over Die Hard some days. Like also if I'm like thinking earnestly about like the future of cinema, I definitely want more Socrateses and less Die Hards, even if Die Hard's a masterpiece, I really adore the Age of Medici, and I think that the thematic and like quasi-prescriptive element of looking at the Renaissance as this fruitful time for art is like so inspirational. And I'm going to go with a hefty, I think I've given a hefty 4.5 bullets to each of these Rossellini history films, and I'm going to continue that trend here. I was just looking at the rankings. It's really hard. Like, I don't really want to do a ranking.
You don't want
honest.
to?
Like,
You're too scared?
Every single Rossellini movie I've seen, even beyond this, is either 4.5 or 5. And so it's like, that's tough. I got to watch more of his movies so that I can have some at the bottom that I feel comfortable with. Cause like, I can't be saying that one of these movies is at the bottom of the Rossellini pit you know, or that like Journey to Italy is the worst Rossellini movie I've seen. Like that's an insane take, you know.
Do you think we could rank the history films that we've seen for this series? Is that something we could do?
I think so. Yeah.
Because
we will try to do that. But Malcolm, what about, before we do that, what about your rating on this one?
I'm going to give it 4.5 bullets. I was really a fan of kind of, you know, the miniseries structure and how it kind of allowed for kind of an even more kind of complex kind of structure here. And you know, what I think while discussing these movies, we've been talking about how it's kind of, you know, we kind of watch these movies in a different way than we watch other movies, right? It's kind of like, at least me and JT were kind of like, you know, when we were watching The Taking of Power, it's like, all right, we kind of have to like tap into like a different mindset. And I think it's, you know, that's makes these movies all that much more impactful, right? And they're kind of like about information, right? A lot of them, at least I would say, something like Socrates, Blaise Pascal, and Age of Medici are very like kind of about like how ideas kind of formed, became popular, and kind of shaped society. And, you know, you think of traditional movies, right? Like kind of like information is like a device used to like kind of trick you or like kind of put you in suspense or like, you know, like, or kind of like used in a way like in a screenplay, you know, the way you dole out information to make the story that much more like kind of compelling or like, you know, thrilling or whatnot. Whereas this, like it being about information and all the information that you're getting, it is just like, I don't know, it's like the idea of kind of like stakes or kind of all that traditional stuff kind of goes out the window. And you're kind of, you know, if you're a guy like me and didn't know much of this stuff, you know, I know, you know, maybe some of the broad strokes of like someone who like Socrates is, but or maybe that like Medici was like a wealthy merchant that influenced society. But I don't know, you're just really fed with some, like, it's not only like it's about, you get the information itself, but then it's about how the information kind of got proliferated throughout society. And it's just, I don't know, it's just such a valuable tool. And it is, you know, I think it's kind of reawakening our love of education, right? Because, you know, maybe we weren't, you know, like anyone who like listens to a bunch of music, watches a bunch of movies, even if they didn't enjoy school, they like an education of some sorts, right? Like they like, you know, getting the history of music and going back from albums from, you know, 60s, 70s and listening to those, and, you know, same with movies. But I guess it's just like, this just feels, you know, this presents information in such a compelling way and is so, you know, intersects with our interest in kind of cinema and this kind of great cinematic figure in Rossellini. You know, I'm very thankful for them, and it's you know, it's important to know it's cool to learn. You know, it's kind of a hack thing you might see on a teacher's, you know, a poster in it, like a grade school teacher's room. But you know, that you know, we do the whole reason we go through, you know, all these movies, right, is that we want to be entertained, but we're also kind of like educating ourselves, and that kind of forms the perspectives that we have on newer releases and whatnot. So, you know, it is information is power, knowledge is power, and this is something that the Rossellini movies really say with their chest. They're all about that. So I've really admired that.
Well, yeah, it's like the knowledge is power thing is true beyond cinema and goes into the interdisciplinary stuff of this movie, where it's like, it really does matter. And I think that like knowing film history makes you understand new films much better, and also knowing about geometry makes you understand composition better as well, as a craftsperson of composition, not as a critic necessarily. But anyway, I was just looking, there is enough to do next year, next December. Rossellini Rewind Part 2 with Augustine of Hippo, Acts of the Apostles, and Cartesius, and the Messiah. So that's like 3 out of 4 super religious, and one of them is about our buddy Rene Descartes, who popped up in one of these ones as well. So they're there for us, you know, and for further exploration. We've all given our ratings now, and I think now we did, right?
Yeah, we gave our ratings. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and now we are going to give our rankings, and this is hard. This is hard for me because, and we'll just do it. Each of us goes rather than, you know, what's your number 4? You know, the bottom of my number 4 is actually Taking of Power by Louis XIV, which is crazy because I rated it higher than you guys at the time, and it's not like it's diminished in its powers whatsoever. I just feel like he found his groove for these kind of TV history movies later on. Then I go Blaise Pascal, which was just a joyous time. Then this one, The Age of Medici. And my favorite was Socrates. I think the idea of doing The Last Days of Socrates as a passion play is like kind of beyond anything he was doing in terms of just the mere concepts of any of these films. And I just really loved that choice. And the performance was, like, to me, by far the best of all of these. Kind of splitting the difference between the theatrical educational style and something a little more stylized and human. But that's my ranking. What about you, JT?
Yeah, I think, well, my number 4 is the same as yours. I'm also going Louis XIV. Again, like, it's a pretty, like, amazing film still, but I still think that, like, what you're saying about him, like, finding his groove is entirely true. The camera work is, like, less dynamic than what follows, but again, still, like, such a great movie. Then for me, I'm probably gonna go Medici 3, Socrates number 2, and Blaise Pascal was my favorite.
Nice. The I gotta say, the roof scene, the demonstration of the vacuum where he has his boy climb the ladder to go on the roof while he's soaking his boots in brandy, might be my favorite scene of this entire miniseries. Malcolm, what's your ranking?
Well, I like that we all have different rankings here, which I think is fun. I feel like we agree too much. We got to, start being like ESPN First Take, I should have just been like, these movies suck. They're so boring. How could you watch this shit? It's about a bunch of old guys who don't know anything about today's society, so it doesn't apply to me.
Roberto Rossellini needs to step up.
So you think, you could step away from the big movies and hide away in your history book, and we're all supposed to respect that? No, make that mainstream banger that makes you a household name, Rossellini. No. But, that'd be fun if the show was like that. Rankings.
Yeah, Socrates is definitely in the GOAT conversation. But you're telling me you're gonna put Blaise Pascal up there as well? No way.
Dude never left his room. He was a shut-in. He was a loser.
I was thinking a lot about sports commentators getting hype about Blaise Pascal in particular when I was watching this miniseries. Just the First Take guys, or even just like Bill Simmons, just like, look, the vacuum thing's crazy. I think it's AI.
My ranking, one thing I guess we do all agree on, I will put The Taking of Power by Louis XIV at number 4 for me. But then I'm going to go 3 Socrates, 2 Age of Medici, and 1 Blaise Pascal. And nice. I think what you said about the Socrates movie is true. I feel like that is kind of like the most interesting kind of conceit, like in like a storytelling kind of way, like kind of framing Socrates as Jesus, but I guess I was kind of, I love the swarthy swagger of Socrates, of course, but like there was just something about Blaise Pascal and kind of his character and all that kind of like the way he kind of operated, where he's coming up with stuff, but then he's gonna like rot in his bed with like a sickness for like 3 weeks. And I don't know, there's just something, maybe it's the Catholic education, but I admired the suffering and whatnot, and I just thought it made him a very compelling character, on top of like all the different stuff he was up to, all his kind of confluence of interests, much like the Mr. Medici would encourage through his charitable donations to all the artists. So Blaise Pascal was my favorite out of the series, but like you guys have said, I've enjoyed all of these a great amount.
One last thought on Age of Medici. This is what Megalopolis should have been like.
Oh my god!
Actually, I think it's what Megalopolis kind of is. I think it's kind of the Age of Medici of the 21st century. Maybe I gotta rewatch Megalopolis now. Maybe we gotta get Aubrey Plaza playing Joan of Arc, like stat.
I would love for someone to ask him if he's seen the Rossellini history films, just because I feel like that is I bet you're right. I think that's a good connection there, Eddie. I feel like there's so much that's kind of similar about them, and obviously a lot that's different, but yeah.
Also, the fact that Louis XIV's our last place one collectively is hilarious, because it's by far the most popular and acclaimed of these. But it's just like distribution circumstances.
Yeah.
Like it came out in the late 60s and got a actually pretty decent theatrical run in the US in 68, which is like the peak of art house movie going probably in America, if I had to guess, and so it was canonized back then, and then also has its own, like for today's purposes, has its own Criterion release standalone, whereas I think the other three we talked about are all on that Eclipse set. And so it's like, I think Louis XIV, it's on Blu-ray on a standalone thing, and it's just like over time 4K. Been more canonized. Yeah. Well, I don't think it's 4K. I think it's the old BD.
They got the
but
8K,
regardless,
first 8K release. Yeah.
You could see the fucking like staples on some of the set deck, Anyway, I find these films to be so incredible, and I really hope that we've turned you on to some of them, because frankly, this is like our version of making these movies, is covering them, because like people are not listening to these episodes. Like, it's fine, but like, Jesus Christ, compared to like the Verhoeven episodes or like the Tarkovsky episodes, like people are not exactly flocking to these episodes so far.
That's exactly why your plan, we're doing the Rossellini history movies next December too.
Yeah.
Because we know you've all have loved this so much.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, kids. You have to eat your fucking vegetables.
Yeah.
Well,
You have to learn.
I mean, these movies are so enriching that I called my shot before. Like, I was like, these might be the coolest movies ever. I'm just gonna potentially take a bath on a month of the podcast and do a whole month on them, or at least half a month, the main feed for an entire month. And I think it was one of the best series we've done. This is like one of the coolest batches of films ever, and I really hope that they can get programmed someday. Maybe I'll try to take matters into my own hands, but man, it's going to be hard to promote stuff like that. It's hard to get people to roll out for old Blaise Pascal.
Well, you have to trick them to do the Blaise Pascal My Night at Maud's.
That's true, actually.
Because it's just you get butts and seats with My Night at Maud's, but you have to beg them to stick around for Blaise Pascal.
My Night at Maud's did just sell out at Video Archives on VHS, but that is like 14 seats that they sell in that room. So,
or maybe we reverse engineer it where, I feel like I saw a lot of like male mindset influencers be like, the best thing you could ask for Christmas is like Aristotle's like book about whatever. I forgot what it's called, but it's Reflections. It's a pretty famous one. But like maybe we need to make like Socrates and like Blaise Pascal. Like we need to like chop up some clips for Instagram shorts and put like some like ownage ass music behind what they're saying, and then maybe they become more popular figures within society, and people are like, oh shit, a Socrates movie's playing, like I gotta go to this just to soak up the knowledge.
You can absolutely like cook up like with especially Age of Medici, like how much like people are like talking about like what they think people should be doing. You can like totally get like a YouTube reel out of it where you completely crop the conversation and then have just like the loud hype, no, like hype music of them like scheming and wheeling and dealing. Then just the Medici rolling out in the swagged out fit. Like there's something there.
Yeah. Oh man, I think we need our either youngest or most just like video editing savvy listeners to really get cracking on the like TikTok style Blaise Pascal, Cosimo Medici, Socrates, and Louis XIV fan edits, the aura and hype moments edits of those guys, in the style of the Shea Gilgeous-Alexander one that was popular last season.
In the style of the Whiplash YouTube shorts where everything's like weirdly saturated too. Like you have to change the color balance on these things. Yes. Give it a tint too. Like don't be afraid to harm the original product. It's for a greater cause. Yeah.
I also just want to say, to go ESPN first take mode, Rossellini's definitely entering the GOAT convo. Like, after this series, like, I mean, because these aren't even the best stuff I've seen from him, too. That's the craziest part, is like, I kind of rank these all as one thing for him, even though I shouldn't, but I am right now for this purpose. And it's like, I still put Germany Year Zero probably ahead of these.
Editor's note, I meant to say Rome Open City. I haven't even seen Germany Year Zero. I'm just so hyped on Rossellini.
And I definitely put Flowers of St. Francis ahead of these because that's just like potentially a top 10 movie for me. And so the fact that these I've just been like gushing about, and there's still some Rossellini I like even better, is like, this guy's definitely one of the best of all time. We definitely need to do more of his stuff on the podcast next year.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
He's a great guy. But yeah, he's going up the ranks too. It is just,
I feel like when you do it's kind of Mahomesy. It's kind of
he's taking the crown away from Christopher Nolan for me right now.
Yeah. Anyway, you can always email us at extendedclippodcast@gmail.com and get an extra episode every single week for $5 a month on Patreon. Our last Patreon episode was on The Innocent, a TV movie with Kelsey Grammer, and our next Patreon episode is going to be on the best movies we watched for the first time in 2025. Not on the podcast, because this is not a podcast clip show. And that is going to be it for this year on the main feed, everybody. I hope you all have a lovely holidays with your family or your loved ones or your friends or your movie buddies that you watch on your TV. Whatever it may be, I hope you have a blessed time. And I know that this time of year can be hard for a lot of people. And just know that your buddies at Extended Clip are wishing you well this holiday season. And after the new year, just a couple days after, we're going to have our best movies of 2025 episode drop. So we will see you soon. Goodbye, everybody.